7:02. What's your pleasure? Because you didn't hear that,
I have heard nothing other than Vicky.
what
saying
Vicky's,
She won't be here.
oh,
I don't know about Eric.
okay, so let's go on the premise,
We won't have a,
no, we have a quorum, we've got 3 and we have an alternate.
yeah, but if we, that other case, we would have.
We'll have,
But there's no decisions for the other case, so there's.
That's
it can be
true.
right,
heard
and we
discussed
have a
and not-
quorum, and that will then be up to the applicant whether that's acceptable. But, so, what's your pleasure? We can get started with this group.
High quality group.
High quality group, is that,
That sounds great.
okay, so let's do that, and, so Dave, shall I reopen the continuation of the lot line adjustment?
Yes.
Okay, done, right? And you were going to work on the numbers with David, and then you were gonna put in the same size second page with the pictorial easement, and then the wording from the easement.
Right.
Okay. So, David, how do the numbers?
The numbers all, with the exception that you transposed 2 numbers, so we got that corrected.
But you got that
Yeah, that was,
correct?
yeah, so that, all the numbers looked fine.
Okay.
So I, had no issues with any of the numbers other than that. And then the only other issue I had was with the second page, and we talked a little bit about it, but the description of the area 2B,
2B.
2B, which is the most of the area that's, the western area away from the brook. Actually, anything over 100 feet from the brook. I'm sorry, heading to the east. If you look in the table where it shows the dots, I disagree with the wording, and we talked a little bit about doing it, changing it, and I just think it's something the board needs to figure out what they exactly would like to see.
Well, okay, so, first, what bothers you about the wording?
Okay, if you, let me grab the actual easement. In reference to that area, and the easement describes 2 areas, A and B. A being within 100 feet of the brook, and B being everything beyond that, heading towards the east. And this is broken up into A and B, I'm sorry, 1 and 2, because of the proposed subdivision. So when you're talking about area B in the.
Oh, can I just stop you
Yeah.
for a moment? Because don't we want to appoint,
That's right.
yeah.
Sorry,
Okay.
yes, yes.
I would like to appoint, this is your first appointment,
This
isn't
would
it?
be the first.
Wow.
Congratulations, and
I'll do my best.
He's done this surgery many times before, it's not gonna be a problem. Okay, I'm sorry.
Yep, no, that.
Yeah.
So basically, the description in the easement says area B beyond 100 feet of the shore of Hughes Brook. And since, that's anything, basically it'd be to the east of that 100-foot line. And it lists all the restrictions, which, you cannot construct or place, it prevents or will not, the terms concentrated here in use shall mean that the grantor will not accept as otherwise provided here and conduct or permit the following activities: constructing or placing structures, dumping trash, rubbish, excavation, that type of thing. Then it says, notwithstanding anything contained above, the grantor reserves the right to conduct or permit on or within area B the following. And where this came from, the actual wording is to construct and or place additional structures in area 2 as shown on the site plan, which site plan is capitalized, meaning if you look at the beginning of the easement, site plan is defined, and that when you see site plan capitalized, it's referring to a specific site plan that was approved by the zoning board
so it can be
Yeah,
a little confusing.
Right.
So maybe the solution would be to have the actual wording,
I think that would be probably the best.
because this is clearly gonna be an ongoing
Right.
thing, so, yeah, so
One
what,
of the problems I see happening is that if people read a document like this,
they're not gonna go back to the
right,
source.
and they say, oh, here's what is in the easement, they don't go back and things get missed and we have problems like we're seeing now.
Yeah,
So I would like to see the actual wording from the easement on that.
Okay, I sent David an email with a proposed revision to the language that's on the sheet you have,
you mean, yeah,
to try and incorporate his concerns. So
okay.
that's what, I can read that if you guys want to hear what it says, or we can just try and take the actual language from the easement
What
itself.
would you prefer, David?
I would prefer the actual language.
I think that makes sense.
Okay.
One,
That's fine.
That way there's just no potential for
Yeah.
confusion.
Because
And-
the way you have written it says, any structure which differ from the site plan, whether larger or smaller, again, that leads people to believe that you can just go to the zoning board or the planning board and say, I'd like another structure. And if only structures that are on that site plan are allowed.
Unless you get approval from the zoning
No.
board and the planning board, yes.
No, I do not read that. To construct and replace any additional structure or structures in area 2 as shown on the site plan.
Right, then it references condition G of the 93-087.
Which, if we take that, condition G. Further expansion of structures used by Crossroads Academy will require a special exception from the zoning board of approval or by the planning board.
Right,
That does not say that you can add new structures. The only thing that you can add, as far as structures are concerned, are anything that's on that site plan. If it's on that site plan and you wanna go larger, then you need to go to the zoning board and the planning board.
right.
But you can't just add new structures in there
No,
that's not on the site plan.
If I understand the easement, anything that differs from what is shown on, I have a copy of the plan that's attached to the easement. Anything that is different from that, whether it's a different structure, larger, smaller, in a different place, all of those would require a special exception from the zoning board and
Well,
planning board approval, right? Is
Let-
that-
No,
I think this is an issue that I'm not sure we have to deal with now. I mean, you've heard David's
Right.
interpretation,
Okay.
and he's the administrator. So, he would be the person you go through first, and you can discuss it with him at greater length. But for our purposes, I think this illustrates further the necessity to have the original language included here.
Right,
And you can work that out with David, because that's really not what we're hearing.
but just before you guys vote or anything, I just wanna make sure that I understand. Your interpretation is not that Crossroads has no ability to come back and ask for site plan and zoning board approval to build a new middle school to replace the one that exists on the former area 2.
I will have a huge problem. I don't believe that you have, believe that the easement will prohibit you.
From any structure.
If it is not on that site plan, then I don't believe you have the right to construct it.
Okay, I don't wanna take up your time
Yeah.
with that, but that's,
Well, okay, well,
we've spent now, since we've been in front of you guys, but going back to September, and then we saw the zoning board, and this is the 4th hearing with you guys. The whole intent all along has been to replace the trailers
mhm,
with a real building for the middle school, and that's still our intent. My understanding of the easement is that we absolutely will require, per the easement, the approval of both the zoning board and the planning board for any structure that differs from this plan, but I don't read it as saying it has to be this plan
well,
or nothing.
the process, I understand what you're saying. The process would be David makes the determination. You can,
You would apply to me for a building, I would deny it,
and
and
then
you could ask the zoning
Well-
board
Yeah.
And it would also be, the Conservation Commission would be the ones that would be they are the monitors of the easement.
But I wonder in this case if it would be worth going back to the person that put the easement, going back to Bain, who actually put the easement on, to see what he wanted, what he meant, what
But
he
that,
wanted.
it's really. I
It
mean,
doesn't mean,
doesn't-
even what if what was written is not what he
Yeah.
meant, that's, I'm
It's-
sorry, that's,
it's-
Yeah, but it would be
that's not-
interesting to know what he.
yeah.
But it wouldn't be, you know, he might have intended something different than what was written. I think, I understand and sympathize, but it's David's job to interpret, and he does a good job. And I think the thing is that if you disagree with his interpretation, then you have, you know, you can, he would go to the zoning board for that, or would he come to us?
That would be the first step, right? Could appeal administrative decision.
Right, that would be my administrative decision, that easement,
Would go to the zoning.
and I'm not sure if that's something I'd have to talk to town council
Okay.
about, to make sure that, you know, I don't wanna send you to the zoning board and have them not have the jurisdiction, because it's not really a zoning, issue.
But he has recourse,
Yes, he absolutely has recourse, you know,
and you'll let him know what that
Yeah,
recourse is.
and, like I say, it would have to be I believe that it's the Conservation Commission's job to monitor easements, so they'd be the ones who would also be involved to say, whether if that's what they read also. And then, you know, I talk to town council, and make sure that I'm not making an incorrect decision. But
Okay,
from what I've read, this, you know, it's very clear to me that it prohibits any new buildings in that area B, except did reserve the right to construct buildings that were on that plan.
so your interpretation is that they could expand the buildings
So if the building is on the plan,
that are
then-
on the plan?
it can be expanded, but as far as new structures, I don't believe so.
Okay,
The attorney's gonna have to interpret
what's that?
that. I think the attorney's gonna have to interpret that easement. You know, what it
Well, David interprets it, and then,
Right, then it goes-
then it goes to a friendly discussion. Okay, do you have any other?
So,
I'd like the exact wording here
Yeah,
from
so,
the easement.
so I think,
so I should take, paragraph, B on page three,
Yep.
and then reference the plan, of course, as part of that.
yes, David, do you want all of these to be original language, or just that one?
I didn't find anything other than that one that I had
Okay.
issues with the way it was written.
Okay.
It all seemed to be very
So,
consistent with the,
so it's the 2B?
Yeah.
Yes, so the 2B language should be verbatim,
Okay,
okay? And then, you know, the only other thing is that, I mean, it looks to me, you know, like that outdoor classroom is a problem, but that's gonna be the conservation?
I've asked the Conservation Commission to, they're the monitor.
Yeah,
I say even the monitor who was supposed to be looking over this, wasn't aware of this easement. Was surprised
okay,
when I showed it to him. And so I have not heard back from Blake, but they were going to look into it.
okay, so we'll keep track of that.
Yep.
Because that's something that might come back to us. Does anybody else have questions or comments on the board? No? Any public? Any of you none of you three have any comments? Good to see you again, Phil.
I guess I would just say just how frustrating, you know, to have done what they've done. So I do have empathy for
Yeah,
what Crossroads
I do too.
have done.
Yeah.
And I also appreciate your opinion.
Yes, these things happen. All right, so I'd like to make a motion to approve, this is the lot line adjustment.
Yes.
Right. As shown, with the condition that the easement for area 2B is
Complete easement.
is shown as it was written in
Paragraph B,
verbatim,
page 3.
verbatim, or language to that effect. What do you got there?
Scribbles, but basically it's saying that the change language to the language that's found in the easement describing
In the
that.
original easement, okay. Okay, so I'd like to make that motion.
I'll second
All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay. So, now, I'd like to open, what is it, the site plan review. And as I recall, the site plan review, we were really looking, that was primarily numbers, right?
Yep.
And you're satisfied with those?
Again, I am satisfied with the numbers.
Okay.
I see everything, I looked at I went back, looked at the approved numbers for lot 56, which is the lot that they're annexing everything to. Looked at the original numbers that were approved for that, and then the new numbers from that, the area from 55, and everything matched up,
Okay.
so.
All right, any comments or questions? Does anybody want to, well, make a motion? Okay, you're also shy. I'll make a motion. I'd like to make a motion to approve the site plan review as
I'd say the
shown.
amended, that's the only thing that's corrected, it's an amended.
The
site,
amended
yeah.
site plan review, thank you. As, that we have before us. Is that an adequate motion?
Is it with the new numbers presented by the
Yeah,
applicant?
okay.
I'll second.
Tim seconds, all those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay, you got it.
Thank you. Thank you for all your time, too.
Well,
I know
thank
it's been
you.
a long process, but I
Yeah,
think, I hope, notwithstanding the easement, which is, we'll have to figure
you'll have
that
to
part
work
out,
that
but
out.
I hope that having these sort of guidelines for lot 55 and lot 56 finally sort of,
That's a benefit regardless.
for everyone,
Yeah,
going
because
forward, that
you're gonna
people
be,
won't have to
you're
go
gonna
back
be doing
through
stuff over
back
the
to
years.
1993, they can look at 2019 and say, this and this lot, this is what you can do on here and here. And
Exactly.
yes, there's an easement, and everyone has to
Yeah.
take that into account.
But thank you for your
So,
work.
we'll need two, paper copies and a Mylar copy of the full-size plan,
Okay,
that I can have John sign, for the lot line adjustment. And then those will have to be brought up to Grafton to be registered.
okay. I will, can I send you an electronic copy of the plan with the revised 2D language? So
Yep.
you can
Yep.
sign up on that before I get the
Absolutely.
Mylar printed?
Absolutely.
Okay. All right, thank you all again.
Well, thank
Appreciate it.
you.
Appreciate it.
Okay, so now I'm going to unauthorize you
Yes,
and.
and I am going to recuse
Yes, well,
myself.
you can sit on that end of the table, and
Formally, yes.
anybody who would like to come up to the table, Phil, you missed us?
I have missed you terribly, John. We missed you.
We missed you too.
Somehow, I'm not possible.
Oh, come on.
All right, okay. Welcome back.
Welcome back, yeah. Okay, you wanna,
Well, I'll let Will, from Horizons Engineering take the lead.
okay,
Sure, so what we're trying to get some guidance on here is, coming in conceptually on a condo subdivision, so what they would like to do is create condos of all the cabins and the lodge building at the bottom.
I had your large plans here.
Yeah.
Oh, I just saw it.
I have a copy here too.
The one I knocked over?
Yeah.
Oh, there it is. Right above
Oh,
the-
you got it?
I've got one.
Okay. It'd be easier to spread one out on the table.
Right, so,
So,
this is an overview plan, that some of you are familiar with. This is Route 10 here. This is an existing access, and the lodge, the barn and staff house there, and then
So,
various
so,
cabins.
do you mind if I ask a question?
Interject, please.
So, all of them will be condos, every building on the property?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes, correct. Each of them will be individual condos. We have, we've gone out and surveyed them all again. They were located, but we relocated them and pulled tape around every building, so we have very accurate footprint dimensions. And we started kind of developing a plan set, but it will become more detailed as we move through here. But essentially what you have is kind of a box that we created around each building that
So
we took.
5 feet, you would have 5 feet.
About 5,
Yeah.
it's 5 feet exactly, yeah.
And the idea is to create a building envelope in which the existing cabins are in, to give folks an area outside their cabins that would be semi-private to them, and then for
So
improvements.
the thing that jumps out at me is we would be creating non-conforming lots, so why couldn't you just create, the buildings as condos without attempting to create a lot?
We could do that.
I think
We could do that too. The alternative way of doing it is showing the buildings themselves as the units
Right.
with limited common area outside. The reason that this is a little bit beneficial is just in case in case of a casualty, for example, and you didn't want to rebuild exactly on that.
I just don't,
Footprint.
I don't think we can, we'd be creating non-conforming lots.
Well, they're not lots, they're essentially land units.
well,
The units would have no,
in talking with town council today,
yeah,
that was his concern, that they would become non-conforming lots. And that would be no difference from doing this or creating 19 non-conforming lots that don't have any building on it. That would be the same outcome. And so really, the land would not be, would be considered a lot of record, and that could be a problem.
I'll be happy to talk to town council about that. I think we can structure it either way and get to the same result.
I think it'd be, first of all, I should say, that this is a preliminary hearing, so
Yes,
nobody's
yeah,
bound
non-binding,
by
right.
it. But my first take on this is that I look at them as lots, I think they're even referred to as lots in the summary.
They would not be in the condo documents, they'd be referred to as units, and they would be specifically defined. When you do a typical condominium, you define horizontal boundaries and vertical boundaries, horizontal, vertical. With land condominium units, and I've done this lots of times, you simply don't have horizontal
Well, you could do the
boundaries.
building as
You have
horizontal.
vertical. Well, we could do the building as well. It's a question of flexibility and terminology and how
It
to
also-
word it in the documents.
Concerns me that, and, this is something that I would have to have you folks provide the information, that, what is expandable on the lot? And if you have, if you're taking this as a single lot, and you have a certain amount of lot coverage there now, and are you going to exceed the lot coverage with those
Yeah.
horizontal lines? I can't, you would have to provide that
Right, I would contemplate in the condo documents, and you might wanna do it as a condition of your approval of the conversion, is that there would be no change in the aggregate square building footprint, so there would be a way to control that.
Well, my only issue, as a zoning administrator, is that, there is a number that would be calculated, and that number doesn't get exceeded.
Right,
And if, whether it's owned by a single owner or a bunch of owners, that number is still, to me, the same. And however it's worked out by the association, the expansion, but I can see where it could be very, you had one condo owner that expanded out everything, and then the next wanted to do something, and they couldn't, because the
Yeah.
lot, that would be just, that, that would create problems in the
Yeah,
future.
yeah.
Not necessarily for the town, but for the owners.
Right.
And I would love to have that addressed ahead of time, just to make sure
Yeah,
it's.
I mean, off the top of my head, I think the way to do it, probably the best way from a condo standpoint, is to say, this particular unit is 1,300 square feet of building footprint, you can rebuild it, you can't have more than that amount.
Yep.
And that's a maximum amount for each unit, that's probably the simplest way to do it.
For the footprint.
Well, that would be also, the floor space would also be an
The
issue.
floor space
too,
is building
because,
footprint, right.
Because then you try to go up, you could
Right.
very easily,
Right,
Yeah,
Start.
that was my question.
yep.
and as I've noticed some of those, like the lodge building has quite a bit more footprint defined than, it's not,
Yeah, we took the outermost,
Right,
like,
exactly.
part of the building, basically. And these can be tweaked, there's-
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so, anyway, at least for me, the lot appearances are a concern.
We can, again, I disagree with town council. Who is?
Stephen Whitley.
Oh, Steve Wood, okay.
And please, if you wanna talk to him.
But I don't think it's a big issue, I don't
I
wanna
don't
haggle
imagine that it would be.
over that. We can just define it, will the buildings themselves as the unit.
Okay, yeah, and I
With
think,
limited common area, what you've shown as the building envelope will be limited.
and David, you can correct me when I'm wrong, I wanted to say if I'm wrong. But if they were lots, it'd also they'd have to be on a class 5
Right,
road.
they would have to be, all lots have to,
Right,
or buildable lots have to be on a, have frontage, and
So we're not proposing to create lots.
Okay, so-
that's,
one way or another, it should be absolutely clear that there are not
Right.
lots being
Yeah,
created.
yeah, and that's not the intention.
Right, so
here.
I'm sure we can get to that.
Yep,
So, and then I had questions about parking. What's the arrangement for parking?
There's no change in the way that parking is done now. So we're not proposing to change any of the use, it's still gonna be lodging, and parking will be provided as it is right now.
And I'm just curious, how is it now?
Basically on the grass and in gravel areas that exist there now,
Yeah, it's next to the buildings.
right?
I mean, as it is now, can people basically park wherever they want, or?
By and large, yes,
By and
people
large.
park next to their cabin. Because that's-
But there's no restriction, they can park wherever they want.
Could we back up just a step, and Rich, could you just sort of describe in words what your vision or plan is?
Sure. So,
Is that okay?
Sure.
we have, on the lot that we're talking about, there are 19 cabins that we rent out. There's also a lodge building, there's a staff cabin and a barn. They're the major buildings there. Our plan is to set these up as a condo, ask people to buy one of the condo units. And so, some good things happen. The condo owners share in the revenue of their cabin, and so they get some money at the end of the year. We would use the the purchase price to put in improvements to the infrastructure and to fix up the barn, so that we get a better place, they get a better place, and they get a chance to get some money up. So is that what you're looking for, is that?
No,
Yeah.
I just wanted to hear your words, sort of
Yeah.
what your
Mhm.
vision of what we're trying to do here.
Right.
So Rich, all the rest of the land would be owned by the condominium association, would that how, yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
So that would be
That's right.
taken, like a normal condo.
Right.
Yep.
Right. Just to finish up, we envision running the hospitality business substantially as we do today. We would hope, we expect people would fix up their cabins and insulate them a little bit so that they can be more of a three-season cabin. We could extend the season, we could, it would be just a good thing, make it a happening place.
But not permanent residence?
Well, it can't be because,
Right.
because lodging is defined as transient. So the people who stayed there, you're clear would not be residents of the town.
That's right.
That's right, the condo doc.
The condo documents
We'll address
will
that.
limit the use to what's allowed under the zoning.
Okay, that's important, obviously.
Yep.
So,
Yeah, please.
I should know this, but is there a bathroom in each one of these? There is.
Yep.
So there's a septic system for, that they all go into somewhere?
Well,
One big system?
There's a place where the septic goes, yes, and.
You said the magic word, down comes the birdie. Okay.
I'm gonna actually bring that up.
Yeah,
And
right,
the good-
exactly.
You know, that's one of my concerns,
And
that,
so one of the things that are, part of the infrastructure improvements that we're talking about is that we wanna vary the utilities. You see on the plans, it's up here. There's an easement for a septic system, a leach field up there, and we had a state-approved septic system. The approval for that's expired, and so we'll have to revise that, but.
So all 19 would go, or all the buildings would go to that one?
Yes.
Yeah,
Right.
which would be an improvement,
I would think so.
And that's part of the idea behind this is, by being able to sell the units as condominiums, it's gonna allow the Pinnacle folks to generate some income to do these improvements. So I think it will be an improvement for the property itself, it will be improvement for the environment. it will-
Improvement for the septic would definitely be, yeah.
again, I'm stating, my biggest issue with the septic is, you know, just after 10 years of doing this, I've seen enough systems fail, when they don't get used a whole lot, and then, the cabins get improved, everything's great, and, you go to 3 seasons, and all of a sudden your systems are failing. And, I think I would ask the board to try to come up with some sort of way of ensuring that septic system is one of the first things that gets completed, because I think that is, there are some wetlands in there's stuff that drains right into the pond, and I think a failed septic system out there could very easily start putting a lot of bad stuff in the pond. And,
Not good.
right, and that would, be horrible for your business too, because it would be right there at your
Yeah, at the beach.
beach.
In fact, I think both the town and Pinnacle, and in fact the condo owners are gonna want this because,
It's in everybody's
it's
interest.
in everybody's interest, and so.
Right, frankly, I think the amount of dollars we're asking for that individual unit purchase, they're not gonna pay that unless they know it's going in.
Well, that's right.
To the septic system.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah, and I think burying the power lines is great too.
Right,
So you
and
can
bury the
bury-
water.
And the water lines too, that will give you the 3 season also, because, and I also, if people are coming up to the Upper Valley in the wintertime to go skiing and stuff, if the cabins are available, there's another,
Right.
it's not in my mind anyway, it's not a bad thing.
So it could be 4 seasons.
Right, our
Yeah.
plan is get everything buried. We expect people will go make it 3 season. And if they wanna make it 4, that's great.
Because there's nothing in the zoning that limits the
Well,
seasoning
if
of.
if it was a hotel,
Right,
it
you
would
would have-
it'd be 4 seasons.
So, yeah. that-
So for Will and Phil, just so you know, the other guys know, I'm the rookie in the group. So I get all the questions that might be obvious to you guys. So does this mean that the previous, if I could refer to the previous Pinnacle project, the
Mhm.
co-housing and all that, is shelved or no longer part of the plan, or
So,
does it pre,
so they're separate. This is on a 12-acre parcel that was subdivided off
Couple of years.
4 years ago,
Some
something
time ago.
in 2014, to make this, we call this the lodging.
okay. Because I heard it called Pinnacle, and that's why I'm sort of asking.
This is Lockline Lodge.
Okay,
So-
okay, got it. But for the rookie,
Yes.
I wanted to know, is it part of, is it separate?
Does that
Pinnacle
answer your
is the-
question?
Not quite yet.
Okay.
So Pinnacle is the overarching entity. We run a hospitality business. We're thinking about how can we get co-housing on the remaining 98 acres that are,
And this
On
one,
the-
this one you said was how many?
is about 12.
Okay, thanks. Yes, sir, that answers my.
And, well, just to give you a little more information, all of this is gonna be tied together by some legal documents, so it's a comprehensive whole, because these properties also have the benefit of access to the beach, for example.
Well,
There's-
when you're saying these and these, I'm getting confused. So you said
condo unit.
all of these are gonna be tied together?
Well, the condo units will have the benefit to use the beach, to use the hiking trails, to use certain amenities.
And that's an agreement
off-site.
between
And that will be an agreement between those properties.
those entities?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so but that's just an agreement between
Right.
them?
Right.
Yeah.
But to answer the question, it is part of a broader project, but this is a very discrete part.
Okay. So the broader project is the tying of those things together through the agreements?
Right.
Is that,
Right.
that's what you're?
Yep.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Are there any other?
Sure.
Oh, okay.
One of the things I was looking at the plan is you have access ways to some of the cabins that are not off of the main drive. Are those going to be approved by the state? If these are going to become separate properties, the cabins, is the state going to want to see those accesses become true driveway openings? And that's, I can't answer the question, but,
Rich, is this used right now? This one?
Occasionally, people do drive up there.
I think you keep that one mowed, if I recall right.
Yes,
But there can be access from this way.
right.
And then the other one I know is
And
partly
then
in
this
yours,
is, this is my, actually, right, this is my driveway right here, and so,
but is it, just make sure that you have an easement across that property, across?
Yes.
Okay, but there is a driveway permit for that opening.
yes, in fact, I think it is I that has have an easement from,
Right, but not only the easement, but I assume you have the easement from the Lockline Lodge property, but is there a driveway permit by the state for that?
Don't know.
It may have pre-existed to do
Right.
driveway permitting.
Right,
Are
that's,
you
house was-
talking about Rich's driveway or the one that's in the
Well,
middle?
well, both.
The grass.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
because the richest driveway is partly access,
Right.
and the other one, I just wanna make sure, and get more, just make sure that we have all that
I
covered and
mean,
that
I'm
people.
speaking up from the
Right.
peanut gallery here, those are all regularly used driveways and have been,
Right, but
including the middle one.
I still think, if that's going to become access ways to properties, the state should have given permission to use it off of the,
Even like 90 years ago?
well, not 90 years ago, nowadays, they're going to, because you're creating basically 19 properties back there. I assume that the state is, they would consider that a change, and they would like to weigh in on that.
We can talk to, is it District 3?
Two.
To District 2? Yep.
Check in
They've changed engineers, I don't remember the new guy's name.
with them. Doug King's not there?
I don't think he's there anymore.
So Chris Turgeon was the assistant.
Yeah, I don't know, I haven't talked to the new one.
Yeah,
Been there a
I've
couple
worked
of
with Chris
years
on a
ago.
bunch of different projects.
We can run the plans.
Right, it just
by
something
them.
just to make sure that they're not all of a sudden
Horrified.
Right.
say, hey, you don't have access.
Yep.
Yep.
And that way, the owners will also have a little peace of mind knowing they're not gonna all of a sudden not have access to their property.
One thing I guess I was looking for a little feedback from the board on is we had put together a list of what we anticipated for waiver requests on this, because this is a very different it requires the major subdivision checklist, but we're not doing any new construction, we're not building any roads, we're not doing any drainage, or we're not really changing anything other than, creating these condos. So, we were I guess we were hoping to waive quite a few of these, requirements that are typically included. So the watershed map,
Well, I can give you a general answer is that, speaking for myself, my inclination would be to waive whatever is reasonable to be waived. I mean, if it's not necessary for the purposes of this
I think,
plan.
in looking at what you're asking, the waiver for the scale, I don't see it personally doesn't have an issue because, it doesn't show well at the larger scale.
yeah.
So that, I have no problems with. The watershed map, to be honest, I think that one's been beaten to death over the years, that we've seen plenty of maps showing where the water is on this lot. And I don't personally, because there are no new buildings.
Yeah, the reason I think it's great, why don't you go through and give your comments, but I just said, the reason I said that generally is because we have two members who aren't gonna be here who,
They have different opinions.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, that happens.
Yeah.
But I guess if there's anyone here who doesn't agree with the waivers we're requesting, it'd be nice to know that.
Okay.
And we can, that way we can.
So why don't we go through them? But again, I
understand.
said we're not bound and people
Right.
can change their minds.
Understood.
So that, to whatever degree that's helpful.
The lot size and density calculation, to me, that is something that we should have, and work out, if you're going to allow any expansion of the existing buildings. Like I say, from my point of view, from the zoning point of view, if there's lot coverage that's available that can be used, I have no issues with it being used. I think it's up to the condo association to figure out how that would get doled out. So knowing that ahead of time, that there's X number of lot coverage that could be used.
Well, I mean,
Then-
but you would be concerned if it was an expansion into a wetland or something like that.
Well, that also, that's,
Okay.
I haven't gotten down to those, the other maps, but so the lot size and density calculations, I do feel, it's a good thing to
I
have
agree.
down ahead of time so that we know we're all working from the same.
Which we should have from that subdivision
Right,
application.
exactly, that
Which I did
information.
not find, by the way, so we can track that down, or maybe you can get us a copy of it.
I
Because
can
the
see what-
calculation should already be done, we should know where.
From the old, referring to the old subdivision, the original subdivision?
When this subdivision was created,
Way back, yeah.
presumably you had all those calculations for that. But the recorded plan doesn't show them on it, that's why this was in other documentation.
Water supply, I do feel that should be shown because that's something that you're talking about an intended improvement. And anything that you are intending on improving, that the board would be making a decision to say, yes, we think that this can go ahead with that you're going to improve these things, that should be shown.
Well,
So-
I don't think that, okay, I mean, we don't have a design for that yet, and we can show, we show existing infrastructure. And it's hard to say exactly what they might do. They might say we wanna redo the whole water system, which would be great, but I don't think we wanna commit them to that right now, you know?
Yeah, I can understand not committing, and I think that's fine, but it should be at least shown, noted, or something that there's, so we know where the well is, where the water lines
Well, the existing infrastructure is shown.
is there, okay.
Yeah, and we have the wells right here, and the water lines are showing up on the plan here. So the existing infrastructure is shown. Yeah, I guess I was requesting the waiver there because of the fact that we weren't showing any proposed, new water system and analysis of proposed water supply and computation requirements, that kind of stuff.
Because I think, adding the, water supply, in the future is probably something that would, I need to think about it some more, but I believe that would be subject to site plan review, because it is a commercial property.
If we were to upgrade this.
To upgrade, that it would need to go through site plan review to,
Okay. So if we show existing infrastructure at this point for this application,
yeah, I think that would be.
that's adequate?
Yeah.
Okay.
And just a suggestion, David, to file away, you could just we could include a note on the plan or as a condition saying any changes to the existing, prior to any changes to the existing water supply, we've got to return to the planning board.
Yeah, I think that
Yeah,
would.
I think that's a good idea.
So,
Yeah.
Surface water, again, I think that one's pretty well been beaten to death over the years, that,
Yeah,
If they put in, they'll have to put in a new road or upgrade the road.
well, that's, you said not, and again, that's also part of my question about the access, is the new owners, are they going to want, if they wanna have a 3-season access and they wanna start getting there as soon as the snow comes off the ground in April, they're not gonna be able to get through that field with their car. That's just, especially, over towards Rich's house, that's, that area is low and it's gonna be muddy. So they may want increased, and, again, maybe something to talk about amongst yourself is part of the plan to improve that access and make it a real road in there.
Yeah, then we need information about that.
Right, but that's, again,
right.
but I think, when I sit back and think to myself, if I was buying one of these, what would I want? And, I would wanna make sure that the water supply was good, the septic was good, and I had access. And if I had any ideas about expansion, or, how I could do that.
Wouldn't it really be 4-season access for fire protection? I mean, if you were gonna improve the cabin, it seems like if I
Well,
was.
if you're gonna be using it for 4 seasons,
Well,
right,
no,
currently.
Even
there
if
is-
you're not there, even if you're in the wintertime, if there's a problem, and you can't get to it from a fire response
They
perspective.
can now.
Right. I guess my thought would be is that if it was.
That may turn out to be an insurance,
Right.
insurability
Yeah.
issue.
and one thing, since this is the project before the board, we can request that there's 4-season fire access, or at least ask for input
I
from the
don't know.
fire
Yeah,
department.
I would just think, I was just mostly feedback for Rich, is that, I mean, if I was to buy it and do improvements, then I guess I'd wanna know that those improvements could get protected, or at least insurance protected.
There's a couple things. If you're not gonna use it during the very worst of the winter, you turn the power off.
Sure.
Turn
Yeah,
the
you
power
can do things
off,
to prevent
and then
problems.
that's pretty safe.
Ish, but yeah,
Right, I mean, nothing's safe, but.
Yeah, it's a question of whether you plow or not, really.
yeah,
that's the other-
maintain and access, yeah, stuff like that. That is just a thought, as you're talking about access.
In surface water, I don't personally have,
Well, we have
so much
We have
detailed
plenty of
drawings
information
from
about that.
many years that I don't think that that's, and the same thing with the natural and historic features. We have all that. Recycling and solid waste disposal, since it's not going to become any full-time residence, it's no different than what's already going on there now. So I don't see, unless you change.
Well, I
each person's-
guess if there's an increased intensity of use, there might be some, but it's probably not that big a deal.
And then the police and fire, those I believe should be addressed.
It is
Yeah.
As
notified.
Kevin brought up
Yeah,
with the
I-
four-season fire, you know, if Mike Mundy feels that there's something that if he has a concern.
Yeah, I agree.
And then, again, always with Sean, because, you know, he's the one that has to deal with the people crossing the road and, you know, all the issues with that, so I think at least he should be given the opportunity to comment. Impact of the subdivision, I don't think that there's, you know, again, we're not, since it will be written in as that it's not going to be residential, I don't see it as much of a change from what's already there, other than maybe a little more intensity, but again, I can't see that as a huge issue. I don't consider that a negative, actually. The construction plans,
Provided
still-
we're not building anything.
Right, you know, we do have the old septic system plan on file, if that's what is going to get built, or at least try to get that reapproved.
That's the intent, is to dust that off, make sure it complies with current regulations, and then submit it again.
So I think as long as, and like I said, and you said, I agree with you that I think the owners are going to wanna have guarantees that this is going to happen, but I think the planning board also needs some sort of guarantee that, you know, these improvements are going to take place.
Yeah, if individuals do work on the cabins, then they have to get a building permit.
Yes, they would have to get,
Anyway.
individuals would have to get building permits. And again, you know, building permits, if you're basically just repairing, you don't need a permit. It's only when you're doing upgrades. So if you're taking the 30-year shingles off and putting 30-year shingles on, that doesn't really require a permit. It's nice to have them because if for some reason the assessment is being lowered because of condition, and that condition, even if it's not being brought to something different, it's nice to know that so that the assessor can look at that.
Hold tight for just a second. Have you talked to the state at all about the crossing of Route 10 with people and kids?
Yep.
And have they given you any feedback as far as what you might be able to do? And the only reason why I ask is because I've been working just recently with them for the school and the library,
Right.
trying to improve that crosswalk with basically, they have in Hanover, where you push the button, the signs start to flash and all that.
Right.
If you have, and if they're somewhat acceptable to it, I could forward you everything that I'm getting that they require, and it's substantial. I mean, my first document was like 80 pages for ADA accessibility and stuff like that. But, I mean, I think if you're interested, or if you've thought about it, or, you know, but if the state has already said, no, we're not gonna do anything there to try to control the traffic in the crosswalk traffic. It's just a thought, that if you'd like it, I'll send it to you.
Yeah, we've had brief discussions with the state, and they said, I mean, they didn't say 80 pages, but they said, you know, there's some things that we would ask you to do first, and then if you still want the flashy lights, then there's more. that
So you're aware.
you could do, yes, so
Okay.
we've thought about it.
Well, if you want all those, as I get them, if you want them, just let me know.
All right, excellent.
Because I think anything, you know, if you do develop in people, but to me, once again, it's like sort of with fire protection. I'm buying, developing, and fixing up stuff, that's good. And then in the summertime for the usage, you know, one of the difficult areas right there is just crossing Route 10.
Right, and that's,
But if we can improve that from a safety perspective, and talk about the police and all this and that, That would be a real bonus.
And the hard part is, the states, it is a state road.
I
The
know.
state's not, in fact, they cautioned us against asking to lower the speed limit there. Because the engineer said, if you ask us to take a look at it, we might raise the speed limit.
Really?
Or they might just, I mean, he didn't know. He said, if we looked at it and we said, no, that could be 40 miles an hour there. And it's like, so he says, don't ask me.
Leave well. It's too bad you can put a tunnel under, like
I'm the
the,
tunnel person, yes, just like,
Just like you.
I'm Holderness.
Holderness.
Just like, yes.
Well,
it
there's
would
one
be expensive, but it would be
in,
possible.
It's either Fairleigh, West Fairleigh, or Thetford, I don't know which, because they all converge on that same, but it's on one of the camps on Lake Fairleigh. They have, part of the camp is on both sides
Right.
of 244, and
Mhm.
it's just a very large culvert
Yeah.
that you can walk through, and it's kind of oval shaped. And it goes right underneath the road, and when the school district needed to use the camp as a kindergarten, actually as a school for their,
Ah.
while they're getting their other school renovated, they use that for the first half of the year, and all the kids would go underneath the parents drop them off in the parking lot on one side, and everyone goes underneath, and it was a beautiful thing.
Actually, maybe we can revive the bridge next to my house. Remember the?
Yep.
Oh, yeah, I remember that when that was there, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't
For the
remember
camp.
it there, I have a picture of it, but,
Yeah.
so if you, just
Kids
north
used
of
it.
my house, there's a big chunk of concrete on top of the outcropping there.
Yeah.
And there was a bridge over Route 10.
Yeah, there's a walkway that went across
Yeah, they had
the,
one on-
all the
on-
camp kids.
right,
Yeah.
Fairleigh
Bridge
also.
over troubled road.
But the state doesn't like those anymore
Yeah,
because
right.
of height restrictions.
Right. But a tunnel would work. I mean, in
Yeah,
years
I'd
to
like
come,
to
as
know
Route
what
10
that
gets
was.
more and more busier and busier,
Right.
it would be even.
I think the problem would be water. I think you're
Well,
thinking that
there's a
that
couple
would.
problems. Problem is water.
You'd have
There's
to wade
also
through.
Not much grade change there, right? So at Holderness, they have, the road sits way higher than the grade around it,
Right.
so it's a lot easier to put a big giant culvert underneath
You
there.
have to have steps down.
You would have to have
steps up.
steps down, steps up.
And then you
Yeah.
end up getting below the water line.
You would be well below water table there.
Yeah.
Oh, water table, yeah.
Right,
Oh,
because the lake,
right.
I mean, the pond's right there, there's a wetland right next to it.
What could go
It's-
wrong?
Yeah.
Everybody
it's
gets
Covered,
things.
covered skating rink.
There we
In the
go.
wintertime.
All right,
What else?
The next one is the performance and maintenance surety. That one, I can't answer that one for the board because whatever the board decides for, if they want to have assurances that septic gets built, that stuff gets buried, whatever, they may want a performance bond to say that you have X number of years to sell these and do that, otherwise we will exercise the bond and have it done. It'd be just, it's same as they would do for any large subdivision that has, infrastructure.
Yeah, I think,
So I can't,
well, yeah, I mean, we can't, say we don't have everybody here.
So
and
you're
we-
requesting a
and we
waiver for
And we
that?
don't have all the facts, so that would not.
right, I'm just saying, I
Yeah.
can't say that that would be something that you would waive.
Well,
In any case,
I'm
we
agree.
probably wouldn't submit that with our application anyway, right?
We wouldn't
It would
ask
be
for a waiver
condition.
and just-
It'd be a condition, I guess I didn't need to request it. That's it.
Okay.
Any other questions or anything we should know?
I mean, I think we went over pretty much everything.
We're covered with all of the RSA and state RSA. Right? We don't even have to deal with that.
I don't think so.
I don't think so either, okay.
Um, Yeah, my biggest concern would be the, creating non-conforming lots.
Yeah.
That's my biggest concern. And it's easy to get around that, but I just,
One of the concerns, people claiming residency.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
the reason I have issues is the zoning ordinance only allows one use per lot, and if you're, we've already established that the lot is lodging and accommodations. And if somebody bought one of the condos and then decided that they were going to use it for their child to go to Dartmouth, and that was, they registered their car and registered to vote, then to me, that would be a clear violation of the zoning ordinance, and
I agree.
Yeah, well, there's two answers to that. One is they'll get a cease and desist order from the town swiftly, as soon as they probably go to register their car, if not before.
But that's one of the, I don't know, because I don't know what is public record and what I access, I don't, that they can't give me anything. You know, if I'm trying to even find somebody, a phone number for somebody, the town
you
clerks
can't
may
ask.
have, I can't ask them to look up a phone number that may have been given during an auto registration. So the only thing that really I can use is the voter registration list,
Right.
because that's public record. So I have to be careful that, I can't, it's not going, would not be something that would be easy for me to.
Right. So,
Defined.
right, so there's that, and then in the condo docs themselves, they'll be written very expressly that these are the for lodging accommodations.
And then we could address that
Limited to that.
in the decision.
Yeah, absolutely, and
Yeah,
that would be
yeah, and-
perfectly acceptable to me, that.
Yeah.
And the language in the documents is not unlike if this was a age-restricted housing project where you build into the condo docs the age restrictions and then give the town the ability to enforce them. That's not uncommon.
Anybody else? Do you have any other?
Anything you think about?
I don't think so.
If you have more, you.
Just give me a deal and I can.
Give a call.
Yeah, and I guess we can figure out what the next submission is.
Well, we really would like to note this occasion by welcoming me back. So great to see you again.
I've missed my Thursday night trips to
I
Lyme.
bet.
For a while, I was coming up.
Well, I remember. We knew you well, and then you were gone.
You abandoned us.
You abandoned us. We thought we had something serious.
You and Bobby Hans, she was up.
And Bobby was up, yep. She's gone on to bigger and better.
I saw that, she got a promotion.
Yeah.
Motion and a half.
So now you get to come back over here.
Good, I'm gonna take 1 minute and just check. with you
Sure,
folks.
sure, all right, we'll still be here.
Okay.
So, why don't we do the minutes? Do we have enough people here to approve the minutes? Everybody was here for the last meeting?
I didn't have any.
Okay, does anybody have anything? All right, so I'll make a motion to approve the minutes. Second? All those in favor? All those opposed? Okay. So, the thing we've been working on in the new business is our famous build-out in the septic. Is anything?
I have nothing new on that front. I've had stuff to prepare for, going through all the,
I'm
this
sure,
has
yeah.
taken a lot of my time.
So-
computer issues.
And computer issues, that's been a lot of fun.
So one comment, as this has been developing, thought about it is going from the most accessible information and then working towards the less accessible information. Let's start with what I think is gonna be the most accessible information. And I think that's identifying the lots that are the most obvious candidates for development potential. I think that's gonna be the easiest information to glean, basically once we get your information. And even just looking at the preliminary discussion we had with that map where we marked things, some of the lots just kind of jump out at you. Let's see if I have that here.
And we've taken out all the obvious lots that are.
Yeah, I've been trying to figure out how she did some things, and I may just have to redo them just to, because it will be faster for me to just.
Just to eliminate ones that we know are
Well,
not.
some of the mapping, she didn't create individual maps. I think she linked stuff in and then changed it, all the linking, and so it didn't keep any of it. So you have the base map, and then you just link the table in however you want, not a big deal. I can do that. So what I've been doing is I've gone through her original table, made a copy of it, got rid of all the lots that we felt were non-buildable, cemeteries, the town offices, the.
Yeah, we
Church.
have
Right,
this basically
right,
preliminary thing.
exactly. So I've taken out all those, the lawn, the common, the,
School, cemeteries.
school, cemetery,
town offices.
library, the phone switch building.
Historians have.
So, I mean, when you
And
have the
picking up
two,
historians, because they have housing in there.
right, and they could also change use.
They could sell that.
Yes, they could, yeah, that's true.
So, it's really on the two sides. I mean, when you just look at that quickly, all the stuff that we've eliminated and, you know, like the pit and other things that look,
Oh, I haven't eliminated the pit yet, but I wanted to.
oh, I'm
bring
not
that-
talking, I think the
See
pit.
the pit?
Oh, yeah, well, I wanna talk about that, because I think it probably should be, well, right now it's listed as having the possibility of 47 units.
Well, that didn't make any sense.
Right, well, that's where I'm, that and.
But it's possible to have some development.
Absolutely positive. I think we're gonna see some development in the very near future.
Yeah,
It's not gonna be anywhere near 47 units, and it's going to be mixed use,
yeah,
Yeah,
which is not a bad,
no,
because
Thing.
Brett's gonna buy
Yeah.
that.
he bought
yeah,
it.
you bought it. So,
And
yeah,
he's talked to me so far, in this building here, he has a moving company.
you mean
Yeah,
the one he just bought?
this one I just bought over here.
Yeah.
Which one is that? Baines?
No, Earl's.
Earl Stark's
Oh,
building.
he bought that too?
Yeah.
You want that too?
Good, Brett.
Yeah, where have you been?
I don't know, I've been asleep or
Rip
something.
Van Winkle.
Brett didn't call me and tell me.
Yeah.
Oh, he did me.
Yeah, well, yeah. He used to.
So-
So back to where you're going at as far as criteria or,
Well, I'm looking at the
The
first layer,
paths,
which
yeah.
is sort of like a negative and positive layer. The layer, we're talking about the build out.
trying to like bracket.
Yes.
Yes, so the first bracket are the ones like on there that we eliminated.
Yeah.
And ones, you won't be able to read my writing, but the ones that are eliminated, like the cemetery, you know, just these obvious ones that nothing's ever gonna happen. And ones where there's a good, clearly an obvious opportunity for something to happen. That's the first tier of clarity, I would say, or relative clarity.
Based on house, footprint, lot size, and septic capability. So far, that's our criteria.
Right,
Those
I
are
mean,
the,
I
those
would
are the
look
three.
at what I would basically look at lot coverage, building footprint, and septic capacity.
Mhm.
Those would be the,
So my quick thought, and I'm just sort of spitballing here, would be that you would take that criteria and try to see if there's any other ones that you could deselect.
That's fine. What I was thinking is that for the first pass of all the obvious ones, just establishing them,
Obviously to the positive or obviously.
or negative.
Oh,
What can be eliminated, what
Should
looks
be-
like a
should-
pretty good candidate. I mean, like the pit, so,
Mhm.
and now we know something is gonna happen there.
mhm.
So, and then, like if you did it in circle, you know, interior circles, and then the next concentric circle would be kind of what I was thinking is what you're talking about, okay, then the next ones which are less obvious, let's establish those. And I think as a first somewhat superficial go-around, we would get a decent idea. And we're never going, you know, when you get towards the middle,
Right.
we're never going to have definitive information.
It's not meant to be.
and it's not meant to be.
And I think one of the criteria also could be, and this, I cringe saying this because it means I gotta do a lot of work.
Save the cringing for when you have to do a lot of work.
Well, actually, I think some of it has already been done by, I gotta look at her analysis and try to pick that out, but she should, I believe she already looked at the building footprint that was there. And that's something that should be considered, because if you have a lot that has a fairly large building footprint that's there, but the actual calculated footprint is much smaller.
What do you?
What do you mean by calculated footprint?
When I calculate the footprint of a lot, I come up with a number.
Oh, you're saying the building is bigger than.
Right,
what
but
it-
a lot of times, especially in the downtown area, that number has been exceeded.
They were built hundreds of years ago.
Right, they were built in this,
Right.
1800s, 1700s,
Right.
so they were well before zoning, they're allowed to,
So it's like 12%, is that the?
I think it's 12%.
Right, okay.
It exceeds that number. So that number going forward is what would be allowed. So,
Because it's there.
right, because it's already there. So when you say this lot has no possibility, but then you look, well, wait a minute, it has a huge house on it already. It may move its tier,
Right.
so it is something that I think needs to be in the mix.
In the mix, but still with that, we'd have to make sure that, to the degree that we won't make sure, but have whatever sense we can get of the septic capacity would influence
So-
that.
So I was thinking about it, and I threatened to send you guys a note, and I failed. But I wrote it out. But basically, I think the first thing to do is, it's great that David's come up with a notion of the septic capacity of all the lots. So I presume that from that, you can say, this lot, there's no septic, there's no additional new septic capacity, and we can check this lot off, and then.
Right, well, we can look at the, what's already there, again, looking at the basic bedroom count,
Right,
and say,
okay, right, and so this could support 2 bedrooms, and it's already got more, or this could support 17 bedrooms, whereas only 3.
right, so
And
this
and
is,
so that gives us a notion of bedrooms, that additional, we're sort of looking for lots that could accommodate more development. I think that's where we're going.
Well, we're looking for information on both sides. We wanna know where, if we're gonna guide development or increase the possibilities, we wanna know where.
Right.
And we also wanna know where not, where it's not
It's
possible.
already filled up.
Yeah,
Right,
Right.
yeah, and have an idea maybe of what the total amount of new
right.
could
I
be.
mean, that's the whole
in
point.
Right. in
And
the
you guys were right.
What?
I read up more on build-out, and the scheme is, you assume that everybody is gonna subdivide their parcel as much as they possibly can to get the maximum amount.
Even though that's not gonna happen.
It won't happen, but, I mean, that's what build-out does.
That is
And
what it
so-
is, yes.
So, I stand corrected there,
You know,
and
it
so,
happens.
Yeah,
and so clearly, if there's no new septic capacity on a parcel, done.
Then that goes into the, gets the X.
Right. And then we look at parcels that, Lyme Common District is an acre.
the first thing I would look at is road frontage, because that's gonna be your real determining.
Yep,
Again,
okay.
that's,
Yep,
one of the great things that are big failures of programmers is that they don't know their data. And they just dive in, and one of the things to consider the Lyme Common District is you have a lot of long, narrow lots, especially around the common. And so your road frontage is going to be your limiting factor instead of, you may have plenty of acreage, but
what do we need in the Lyme Common District?
100 feet.
100 feet.
Yeah, it's pretty narrow.
and so,
Sorry.
go ahead.
Finish your thought.
No, I was gonna make something up, go.
Is the is the goal per lot, the number of increased, or keep it as it is, bedrooms? Is that the,
We didn't establish that,
see, I think that's what
Yeah.
we're sort of missing,
yeah.
Yeah, well, that's,
in a way.
Yeah.
So my first thought is establish what that criteria is that you're trying to measure of what you can either increase, decrease, or gotta stay the same. And then, what I scratched out was low, medium, high, so like if you had, the criteria was the number of bedrooms. That's the
And
criteria.
the septic says that.
Okay, that's exactly right, but then you can have low, like, let's just say, this land, lot, house is low, which would be, and we gotta sort of define that, say it's 2 or less new bedrooms or units, whatever you wanna measure.
Well, I
Widgets.
think,
And then medium,
right,
let me just
Yeah.
finish my thought, and then they may not work, but I'm trying to figure out a way so that at the end of the day, the way we're cultivating the data, we've got a criteria to say, okay, that for this build-out analysis, medium might be, 2 to 4 additional, and then high might be greater than 4, greater than 6, or some number. But the question is, number of what? Is
well,
it
that's what I was.
square footage?
I
Is it?
think what we were discussing originally was whether it was gonna be units or
Or
bedrooms.
bedrooms, right.
And,
But we almost need to decide what
Well,
the
that's-
criteria is.
yeah, well,
Bring that
it's
up.
not almost,
For him to keep going.
it's not almost, we need to.
Right.
because,
And so let's discuss that.
one of the things, when you're looking at what's going to limit a lot, the big things that are your limiting factors are the dimensional controls of the ordinance
Mhm.
and the capacity for septic.
And that includes the road frontage.
Well, yes,
That's part of the
That's part of
dimensional
it. You know,
control.
that's-
Yeah.
and part of this may be to, when you look at the subdivision ability of a lot, you're now, it's a very difficult thing to do an analysis on, because you can't just draw lines, or you can't just say, this lot has,
Right,
4 acres.
there's so
you
many
can-
moving parts.
Right, because you have conservation districts, you have,
I'm very familiar
yeah,
with this.
so it's, the subdivision part is almost more an art than a science. With trying to figure out where you're gonna put the lines.
Well, and people may not subdivide, they could add an addition on their
Right.
house. And they could-
Yeah, I mean,
And
in
so-
this context, the subdivision,
I would think almost the subdivision, we're talking about fairly small lots to begin with.
right,
It may be, if we look at individual lots and set a criteria, you have enough square footage to create extra lots, enough acreage, enough road frontage, then I would bump that up on the list that has a potential, but not necessarily, I
yeah,
don't think it has any greater.
Yeah, it's all potential.
it's all potential,
And I
except,
don't know
except for
that's
the
not-
really obvious
Right.
But
surprises.
then, so if we bring it back down to septic capacity,
Dimensional control.
and the dimensional controls for buildings, the septic capacity is, easy enough to calculate. And what I would also do is, calculate the maximum building footprint, or the maximum lot coverage, I guess would be the best way, and then subtract that from the, septic ability, because you can't use that land to, under your house for a septic.
And that's gonna leave you with either units or bedrooms.
Right, well, that's where the bedrooms and units comes in. Size, in this case, size matters. That we don't know, what is when we say how many bedrooms, we found out from looking at the data from the planning commission that some of these units are 400 square feet. And
So, but supposing somebody wants to do a development where they're, whether it's 400, 500, 600,
well, that's,
So,
So I think to answer your question, though,
Yeah.
at some point, you gotta make an assumption.
yeah. And so,
Say we assume that one unit will take, I'm gonna be middle of the road, 500. You know, you gotta make at some point, we're gonna have to make some assumptions so that we can develop the criteria.
Because, you know, you could build a house that has maximum building footprint on a lot that's marginal septic and have one bedroom.
Right.
So that's where, you know, you need to make some assumption as to sizes of units and how much, you know, it's going to take, you know, to create bedrooms.
So,
Because
so
aren't
I've been holding
Go ahead.
my fire here.
Now that you got.
I think we would be well served, your question's a good one, what are we number are we aiming at? Let's figure out how many parcels we can get out. I mean, how many parcels could have any expandability, so we've got some septic numbers already to say, this parcel could or couldn't
Again,
have capacity.
This is where it becomes.
Let me finish, and then I'll shut up for, again, how many parcels could we make based on, you know, if it's already less than an acre, you're not gonna be able to subdivide it, so we can immediately cross that parcel off. If it's big enough, but it's got a big house on it, so there's no additional expandability.
I think that we're already talking about.
Right, I think so, but
We already agree with that.
but what I'm saying is, I think the first cut should be, how many parcels could we get out of the Lyme Common District that
You mean with maximum subdivision?
right, so we can knock out all the little parcels right around the common because they're small and they've already got big houses, we can immediately ignore those. We can look, you know, looking at the parcels around the periphery, how we can guess how much septic this has. It's a 10-acre parcel. Could we divide that into 10 1-acre parcels? Probably not. Could we divide it into 5 2-acre parcels with some kind of road or anything?
Okay,
So-
I'm gonna
and
stop
so-
you for, I
Okay,
mean, I
so
hear what you're
my
saying.
goal is, let's just get to parcels first.
Why?
Because parcels, we can then figure out how parcels get divided out. And by going to bedrooms or going to units or going to,
Okay, so I guess my question is,
Yeah.
aren't we gonna still have to establish that regardless? I mean, we can do both. We can we can maximize the subdivisions, but we're still gonna need to come up with the criteria like Kevin was.
But ultimately, aren't we trying to figure out how many more people are gonna be, I mean, that's what we really care about, is the number of people, right?
Well,
That we're gonna increase.
not really,
Well, yeah, because
because we can't control for people.
no, but I mean, that's really what the bottom line is though, because if somebody builds a bigger house or whatever, but there's no more people, it doesn't really matter as far as the expansion.
well, actually,
It's the number
I
of
mean,
people.
what I've read about build-out analysis is that you do this exercise to say, okay, 30 years from now, everybody did subdivide their
Right.
parcel, and it's like, oh my God, how the hell did we get here?
Right.
And,
Yeah.
and so
That's
it's,
right.
it's not people so much as how many.
Well, you're gonna get a range of people. You might have a huge house with one person in it,
Right.
or you might have a little house with 10 people in it.
Right, but we're
So-
saying if the septic will allow.
If the septic will,
Well-
well, that,
You know, then.
so I'd like to, I'm gonna take my prerogative
Okay. Yep.
here. I think all this is valuable, but I think let's push this thing forward as much as we can. I think it's a good thing to,
My
Get-
preferred metric is get the parcels first,
Okay.
number of parcels that we could divide up.
I mean, can I just
Please.
speak to that one,
Yeah.
because, it's one thing to look at a map and look at a lot and say, okay, it has this much road frontage, it has this much acreage, we can get this many parcels, right? Then read through the subdivision regulations.
I'm sure he
And,
has.
4.02,
Yeah.
or 4. I forget.
So it's really lot specific, as you know.
Right, and
I'm
that's-
quite aware.
When you get
But we're
to,
already going lot specific, so keep going.
when you get to a point, you now have to start taking out areas that are non-developable of a lot. Yeah, I'll point to Katie Jenks' lot up here right across from the cemetery. She has a house up next to the road, and immediately it drops off down into an area that used to be a stream. And so there is a stream, I'm not sure it's truly a perennial stream or not, but I'm pretty sure it is. And so that part of the lot has to be discounted.
Discounted, yes. Yeah.
And so that's not something that shows up easily on a map. And then the same thing, you know, looking at, you know, what's acceptable for a septic system. You know, I do everything calculating it on the computer, so that would mean every single lot, I would have to create lot lines and do all the calculations again on these fictitious lot lines, which is going to be much beyond what I'm gonna be able to have time to do. That's, you know, with all my other, you know, doing the building permits, taking care of the
So-
zoning board, I don't have the
In a way, I
time.
was trying to figure out a way to simplify it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's.
By defining the
getting- that's
criteria,
right.
to make it a little bit higher levels.
So, getting back to that,
Let's-
we wanna go with the most manageable
Yeah,
thing for
right.
David.
And it might be something that we wanna look at
Right,
in the
right, and
future,
and what we.
that I don't think
what
that
we-
you're wrong on
No,
that.
no,
Trust me,
yeah.
I'm
I-
not disagreeing with
I
you.
agree. What we might consider doing now that we have a budget, is, you know, taking elements like that and having somebody else do that work. But, figuring out what we wanna have as a, unit size or bedroom size, whatever, I think is a very valuable thing to start.
Yeah, so, you know, again, we'll, using the pit as an example and using the calculations from the Upper Valley Regional Planning Commission, they came up with that you could put 47 units in the pit.
Yeah, which is not gonna happen.
Right.
Right, and so that was just a basic mathematical calculation
Yeah.
saying that you
No,
could
no
do-
nuance at all.
Right, that, you know, if you divided it, the acreage by 1 acre, you could get X number of lots.
Parcels, right.
And then, you know,
Okay.
so I feel that doing just from a straight mathematical is not going to give you a number. And while, and I do agree with you, that build-out analysis showing the potential of a lot for subdivision is
It's important.
valuable,
It's
but it
important.
needs to be a realistic
Sure.
potential, not a mathematical.
David, do you have an idea of how many lots there are after we take out the obvious ones that can't be?
That was my next question.
I have not done a count.
I mean, like 100.
I got my one more little rabbit trail. It sounded like at the last meeting, or maybe even the one before, that when you looked at the septic, that you were having a hard time getting it to, I don't wanna say meet reality, but no matter how hard you tried, it looked like that wasn't gonna be a criteria. That when you made your calculations, that it allowed for the lots to have relatively large development, if I remember
Yeah,
right.
it does, and I don't, you know, looking at it and thinking about it, I don't think you know, based on the criteria that I created, that it was wrong. I think there are a lot of little things that come into play with septic systems. And,
So where I'm headed is I'm just wondering if it's gonna be a good criteria for us. Because as you tried, as you said, you know, you were coming up with relatively, what I remember for the examples.
Yeah, I think
Relatively
I think
large.
we have to have it.
Well, you do, but see, here's the thing though, is it sounded like with the way David was doing it, and I'm not saying it's wrong, it's probably following the right, you know, like he's not in his spare time a septic designer, but the best he can tell from what's currently regulated, is that it was coming out with relatively large numbers per.
it was large, larger than some of what's, I know is
Currently.
allowed. And so that's where
The other things cut it down.
there's some other,
Large numbers of.
Number of bedrooms.
Bedrooms,
Per,
yeah, or not really,
per-
basically, I'm looking at the lot loading for,
yeah.
but see, the thing about the lot loading is different than a septic design. and again, I'll take Vicky's lot as an example. You know, she has an area of trees that she doesn't want cut down.
Mhm.
So, that was not an area that was determined to be usable for a septic. And then I don't know, and this is where, she didn't pursue it, but her septic designer, said, you're not going to get over 300. And I am not convinced that he was correct.
We're at 300.
30 gallons per day,
Oh.
so 2 bedrooms. I'm not entirely sure that, the state would not have approved, when you look at the lot loading for the lot, that, when you look at where she wanted the system, then
But
I
that's,
think that-
but using her as an example, that's, you know, there, a particular property owners, for instance, insisting that these trees can't be cut, another owner might say, cut them down, you know.
And that would
So
affect
I
that.
wouldn't take into account the particular preferences of a current owner, because.
Well, that's why my number is more around 600 per day for a
Right.
lot, which is, again, I don't feel is
Excessive.
excessive. You know, it would allow for 2 more bedrooms. And when you look at the garage that she built, you could easily, you know, have a small house that has 2
Basically,
bedrooms.
any constraints associated with a particular owner are not significant.
So let me-
Given what we're
And
looking at.
I went through the regulations, and I could not find, you know, there are some limitations where they will not allow for a larger system than what was already installed. And it may have been that there was something about her system that triggered that. And that trigger is that you have X number of bedrooms that you can prove, and they won't allow greater because of the size of the lot. Things like if your system is over 20 years old, and you can't prove, or, you know, it's older than, you know, and there's never an approval for it, then they're gonna look and say, how many bedrooms did you have back in the 60s, actually? And if you can't prove beyond, you know, earlier than that, that you had a system that could handle greater bedrooms, they won't allow larger. And so, I'm not convinced that the lot could not, it might be able to handle more. The state is saying,
Just don't.
we're not going to because it's a small lot and we're hesitant, so we're just gonna say our rules say you can't. And
I guess,
think
to me,
what
I just wanted to make sure that we're locking into the 2 criteria, dimensional controls and septic. Are we?
I think that's right.
Are we
Yeah,
good, are we all
that's-
good?
That's where I am.
But I
Right.
think what we're finding out and what we're saying here is that to get any kind of count that's anywhere close to accurate, we have to do every lot.
No.
Well, no, I don't
No.
think,
You have to do it, that's the only way you're gonna know,
there's-
because every lot is so different,
No,
as
no.
Dave was just saying.
Yeah, but
We
But you
can't, I'm
never
not saying we
can-
can do that.
we're not
but
gonna
I'm just-
do it.
I'm
You're
not
never
saying
gonna
we can do
get
that.
perfect
That's not a
numbers.
goal.
That's not.
Right, but even to get anywhere close,
No,
every
I
lot is
disagree.
so
That's
individual.
why I was talking about obvious to impossible. We're talking about the obvious range to impossible range, and we're just
Right.
going to have to designate certain ones impossible to figure
Well, I'm
out.
saying we can get an
Or
idea.
low,
Or
like,
low.
like there's low, like this, if it's
Low
one, if it's
probability.
1 or 2, you know, the chance of 1 or 2 more units or bedrooms.
Yeah,
Right.
That you just call it low and leave it at that. You don't
Right.
spend, you don't spin your wheels,
exactly.
you know, spending a lot of time defining.
No, I'm
even-
saying, you know, we obviously can't do every lot,
We're
and
not gonna.
and we can get a rough idea, but all I'm saying is that to get anything that's very close to accurate at all,
I
you gotta do
disagree.
every lot.
So Tim, but I think if we could land on a criteria of low, there's low development
Right.
opportunity, less than
Yeah.
2, I'm making up a number, maybe it's 1, or maybe the low is 0. But, and then David knows, okay, if I'm coming up with numbers that suggest between the dimensional control and the septic, that it's 2 or less, I'm gonna call that low. And just leave it at that and not spend a lot more time on it. And then if I come up somewhere in the medium range, whatever medium becomes, 2 to 6. It's a bubble map, basically, John.
Yeah,
Exactly.
it's like
I-
that.
I'm almost thinking a bubble map.
We
And-
add
and-
up all the lot, we add up what we think we can build on all
But-
the
but-
lots, and then you get the total.
But here's the thing. What's gonna really drive the numbers are the high development lots.
Yes,
And so
exactly.
what we ought to be sort of focusing on is identifying
That's
those
exactly
high
it.
development
Yes.
lots. The low ones don't spend a lot of time, just from what you look at, back at it, you say, okay, dimensional controls,
Some of them are
septics,
eyeball.
you almost become eyeball, you say, if David, if it's less than, I'm making up a number, but we decide, if it's less than 2 units, just call it low, and just leave it at that,
Exactly.
and then just step back, so you don't
And
have.
as we get to the, I'm having this as the outer ring as a positive ring, you know, the most positive potential, that's where we can do more digging in. As we move towards here,
You don't waste,
you.
spend time.
Just
Right.
leave it.
Yeah, you look at your ones that you consider having large potential. Again, we'll take the pit as an
The pit's an
example.
obvious one.
So, you know, again, that one, the number that Regional Planning Commission came up, 47. Well, we
Forget
know that is unrealistic.
Right.
But that number of 47 tells you that that lot probably has some potential. And then you can look at that lot, look at
Right.
it and say, you know, because we're not talking thousands of lots here. You know, we're probably gonna be down to less than 20 lots that have a high potential. Look at the numbers and say, well,
Now it's actually 10.
yeah, let's drop that down because we don't believe that that number is,
Right.
the calculated number is
Exactly.
accurate. You know, it definitely has potential, but.
There's a common sense element to it at a certain point, which
And
is
it-
we know that, you know, there are gonna be overlay issues, there are gonna be, you know, various
And
issues.
it's, as I said, you know, with doing, designing subdivisions is an art as much as it is a science, that the same thing goes here, that you have to have some local knowledge, knowledge of what you're looking at, to say, well, the calculation doesn't make, it's a high calculation, but the number itself.
We don't
is-
believe it.
Right.
Do you know what I mean by bubble map?
Oh, this is what I thought.
That's sort of a bubble map, but basically, for each one of the lots, if it was, and once again, I think we have to give them some criteria. If it turns out that you can eyeball and say it's 2 or less, it gets a small, you've seen it like in population.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So that's a
Right.
bubble, so that's a bubble
Right,
map.
so,
is it-
yeah,
so-
here's a
There's town,
and then you have
there's all
here,
the lots.
you have here,
Exactly,
and here.
exactly.
and then, yeah. So let's get to the criteria.
So when I think of a bubble map, that's what I'm thinking of, you got this map here, and then there's some lots that just, David looks at and he says, based on septic and dimensional controls, this is less than 2, small bubble.
When you
Or-
say less than 2, I'm confused by that.
Because
Well-
he's not defining what to what.
Because we needed to, because we still need to.
Well,
Is it-
exactly.
Because is
So I'd
it
like
2
to get to
bedrooms, is
that.
it 2 bedrooms,
So,
or is it 2 units? And so, anyways, the point, you're right, John, we've got
So let's do it.
to start getting into some definition
so what
on
I'd like
the
to,
criteria.
what I'd like to suggest is, we think about, for the next meeting, what do we have coming up? Anything? Well, are you gonna be
Rich
coming
should
back
be
soon?
you're the next contestant.
Yeah, I mean, are you coming
Yes.
back like next time, or?
I think we might be, yeah.
Okay, so
Well,
we have.
You won't be next time because you don't have the 21 days.
That's right, yeah.
Okay, so that, we have an open
Mhm.
meeting?
Yeah.
So everybody, think about, really, we're talking about units or bedrooms. And think through why you prefer one or the other, in the context of how it'll work best, you know, on a practical level for David.
And, you know, when you consider units, you need to define the size.
Well, absolutely.
Because, you know, as I start playing with the dimensional controls.
It's a
of
given that with a unit, we're gonna have to provide a number.
Yeah, because that's, you know, and the idea that, okay, we have X number of square feet that I can work with for a footprint. And,
So let me ask you, what do you think is more valuable from your point of view? A defined unit size or number of bedrooms?
Because a unit can have 1, 2, 3, 4 bedrooms.
well, that's
So-
where I'm seeing, you know, and I would define, again, I'm gonna define units, I would say a unit has 1 bathroom.
Really?
just as a, or bedroom, I should say, not even bathroom, it should be
The unit
bedrooms.
has one bedroom. Okay.
And takes up X number of square feet. So if you wanna have a two-bedroom house, it takes up X plus, X times two. And if you wanna have a three-bedroom, it's X times three. So you define a unit size that would be acceptable for a one-bedroom, and then just keep, and yes, we know that, you know,
If we use bedroom,
well, bedroom is the septic.
yeah, but that's, I mean, how helpful is that gonna be if we're not defining a size to the bedroom? I mean, either way, I think,
It says 22.
any way we go, I don't know what I'm getting at is I'm not sure that
The other
the
issue-
conflict is between bedroom and unit, we're gonna need to come up with a size.
You could go backwards and just go
I
with
agree,
raw,
we need to come up with the size.
Yeah,
or use the raw
You're gonna make some
Data.
assumptions.
and say
Okay.
that the, you have a maximum building, or I guess lot coverage would be the X, lot coverage
Called 1,000 extra square feet
and
for this
X
lot.
lot loading. And use those numbers
And
instead of,
whichever is greater,
no, I would use them
Or
both,
both.
because, you're.
or
if
maybe
you-
whichever is
Wait, say
lesser.
that again, David?
So, you use the lot coverage, is how much of this lot can I cover with buildings?
Right.
As part of that,
So
is
that gives
once
you
I
your
figured,
footprint, that gives you
Right.
your
well,
added
it
footprint.
gives you the maximum you can cover
your
with a
maximum
building.
lot coverage,
Right,
yeah,
Which is
how much you
footprint.
can cover with a building.
And then you gotta assume 2 stories.
right.
And we could do maximum building footprint, which, either
Yeah,
way,
which is saying, it's kind of the same.
well, a little
A
different.
little different,
Because you could have, if you have a building that's a maximum building footprint, you can have greater lot coverage and you can put several buildings, but you can only put one residence. So even though you can put more buildings,
Yeah.
so, all right, let's take and say, if we look at the lot loading less the maximum lot coverage. So what you're saying is, I can put a septic system anywhere that there isn't a building. And so,
so lot loading minus maximum
yeah,
lot coverage, and define lot loading?
it is the, how much of the soil's capacity for
Oh,
septic. So it's the entire lot's capacity.
Right.
I mean, if you use that entire lot, how much
Right.
septic could it support?
How many
So-
bedrooms? Because a septic.
How many
covers the
gallons
bedroom
per day?
Per
Now,
day, which is
Per
determines
person.
your bedroom.
So what
which
you're
could
saying
be-
is,
No, it's gallons per day total.
Is you get your maximum lot coverage, and from there you can figure out what you can build, but you're gonna subtract, the limitations
Right,
from
because you
the
can't-
soil capacity, septic. the
Right, you could
soil
say,
capacity.
I can put this amount of building on it, so that can't be used for septic, so
And
You take that away.
you take that away.
it's really gonna be whichever criteria is the limiting factor,
Yeah, well, I think that the,
because you may end up the other way around.
What do you mean?
You may end, well, so
It'd
it's,
still work out the same way.
maybe I'm misunderstanding, so it just seems to me that it's gonna either be, for that lot, it's either gonna be the dimensional controls or the septic.
It's gonna be the interaction.
Well, that's
But
where-
but whichever is lower
Yeah,
becomes your final
Right.
determinant.
that's right,
That's all I'm saying.
yeah.
well, I think you would weight the capacity for development based on both.
Sure.
Because
Right.
if you have a high septic capacity and a high lot coverage,
Yes.
Well, then you're maxing out there.
right, but that's a lot that has a lot of potential.
Right,
Sure.
yeah.
If you have a lot that has a high building, capacity for building, but a very low septic capacity,
Yes.
that one's going to be bumped down.
That's gonna go into the,
But,
And I
You
think,
could build a
but
big
but
building.
the criteria that cuts it down is then the septic capability. It's really whichever is the greater, or excuse me, the lesser.
yeah, it is.
It's
yeah.
whatever, when you calculate for each lot,
But you're still going to, if you have a lot that has a very small building capacity and a very small septic capacity, that's going to have less potential than a lot that has a large building capacity and a lower
or a
septic.
medium, yeah.
yeah, I
No,
think it'll
And-
sort pretty well. with this.
But then somebody could build a big house with one bedroom, and so we're back to number of people,
Well,
really.
No, but we're looking for a reasonable assumption of maximum.
you're gonna have to.
And the thing is, now, again,
What we're
you're
gonna decide, unit or,
you're
size
stuck
of unit.
in your head on
Right.
bedrooms.
It's probably the easiest.
It is, but
Yeah.
But-
you have to remember, Lime Common District is mixed use. And
Right.
so you're not, your
That's
septic
right.
capacity, just because you can't put in a 6-bedroom house, doesn't mean that you can't have a larger building that is office space.
Right.
Curveball.
That uses a lot less septic.
Right.
Right.
So that's why I think bedrooms are not necessarily going to be the.
Because bedrooms are presuming only one use.
Right. So if you use the lot loading number,
How do they figure for a commercial building, the septic size for, let's say you've got 10
they have a
employees?
table, just like we have table 4.1 or 5.1 in the
So if you have
zoning.
10 employees, then you need X number of gallons per day.
Yep,
And it's less than bedrooms.
it is less than bedrooms because it's not,
Right.
and the reason,
24/7.
Yeah.
well, it's not
And
24/7.
you're not showering.
You're not showering, you're not doing laundry,
Dishes.
doing dishes as much.
Right. So we have to figure all that in.
Well, that's why I'm saying that you can't predict what people are going to do. So I think falling back on the raw numbers is the criteria.
Right.
You're not, you're looking at, trying to decide what lot has potential.
And I'd like to say, I'm gonna spend some time thinking about how can we just look at lot sizes, because the whole point is you've got a 10-acre parcel, and, I know you can't, in a 1-acre zone, you can't divide it into 10 parcels, but we could come up with a fudge factor and say, you might get 5 parcels out of this.
Correlation.
Right.
And then
Right.
these 5
I
parcels
agree.
would have thus and such a maximum lot coverage, and we can figure out how big it's, and so I think what we're gonna find pretty quickly is, first off, we're gonna be able to knock out a lot of properties because they're too small. They don't have the road frontage, they don't have the,
Yeah, we're gonna have this thing.
right. And then for the other properties, we'll say, yeah, it's a 10-acre parcel. We'll assume you're gonna only get 50%, you could divide it into.
We're gonna
10.
have to make assumptions.
Right.
Well, you have to.
Yeah,
And that'll be good enough, because
it
you'll
is good
say,
enough.
because you'll say, okay, on this 2-acre parcel, your lot coverage can be bump to bump square feet, this and that. Yeah, the septic will fit, or the septic won't, this thing doesn't even, doesn't do anything.
I think that's what we all agree on.
Yeah, I think we're basically circling ourselves around some
Yeah,
of the
we're
same
saying the same
concepts.
Good.
And I'll add that I think the thing about getting the information about the subdivided parcels is an important element. But I think this is the way to go into it to start. But that's information we are gonna want, and we're gonna have to approach it similarly, which is we're not gonna get exact. So we're gonna have to make assumptions.
And my guess is we aren't gonna have to there aren't gonna be a lot of parcels that we have to think real hard about.
I don't think it's gonna be, I think it's gonna be a combination of it's always harder than we think. It is.
That's fair.
But it's also what you're saying, which is, there's also an element where it's just obvious in certain circumstances. And I think, a big criteria for this middle part, which is the negative stuff, is it's just too hard to figure out. We just can't get a reliable number. We put it in there.
Okay.
Or something like that. So everybody's homework is to think about what we wanna do, and I think obviously your thoughts on it should carry the most
Well,
weight.
I wanna do what the board
No,
wants.
Well, I think you've got, really, we can think about it harder, but I think you can see where we're headed.
Yeah,
Is that we've gotta start making
We
some.
really have to pick some square footage.
We gotta start making some assumptions
Yeah,
for
I
the
think-
square
I think
footage.
500 is, as you
I
said
don't,
before.
I'm just picking,
No, but
because I heard
think
400,
that's-
600, so I.
That's not
so-
a bad number.
But something like that, David, to help you, and then also help you identify the small give you the criteria for what's a very small developable lot that has very little potential, so that we can just say, okay, this one has little. Maybe it's got a little bit, but let's just not fuss about it,
What I would,
because it's not gonna impact the numbers. The big lots really are what's gonna impact the numbers, so we need to spend more time there, medium time on the medium lots, and like no time, more time on the small lots.
Right.
what I
Or
would
small
like to
development potential.
do, if this works, is that, let me make a pass at doing another set of data for hopefully next week, week
No,
after next.
2 weeks,
Um,
3 weeks.
Because I think I got one case for the zoning board that I gotta work on, that is, I think the previous zoning administrator made a big mistake, and so gotta account for that.
Way back when.
Yeah. And so-
Francesca?
No, before,
No
it's
names.
actually Vicky.
Hey, Vicky.
But.
No name, no
No,
names.
there were several Vickies.
It's a code name, it was a code name.
There were several Vickies that were administrators, so,
Okay.
I won't say which one.
Okay.
But anyway, that's gonna take some time to get that all written up for the zoning board for their next meeting, which is a week after that, but it has to be in before
Sure,
then.
yeah. Yeah,
And then I have,
that'd be great if you
A
could.
couple of septic designs and some other permits that I gotta get through, I think I'm.
Obviously, you have other things as well. You know, what you can get done will be much appreciated.
Yeah, so what I'd like to do is create a data set for next time that shows lot loading and the maximum building footprint
That'd
for
be great.
the lots.
That would be a great start.
And then you can look at those and then start deciding on what criteria of that,
Excellent,
Yeah.
that'd be great.
because then I can, we can see, that way we can see where where the numbers are coming
Right.
in. And instead of just picking numbers out,
Exactly.
you can say, here's the range of the numbers, and okay, here are the natural breaks.
Yep.
And let's use those.
Yep.
And I can do a lot of stuff with the natural breaks and say, okay, here's, we wanna go.
large.
Yep, in this range, this, it has this potential in this range, and we can map out that.
All right, that sounds great. Thank you. Is there any new business or anything we need to know about? Does anybody have anything?
Nothing new that I know of coming
Uh-oh.
down.
Plan New Hampshire has a workshop coming up called Planning for All Ages. It's May 30th. I will be out of town, but that's
Could you,
I can send that to
Send
everybody,
it.
yeah, sure.
Did you get those?
Where's it gonna
I
be?
get some of
It's
those.
in Concord, it's at the Audubon Center in Concord, just inside of Concord.
May 30th?
May
What
30th.
what day of the week is it?
It's a Thursday, yes, 8:30 to 12. They're first-rate presentations. I've heard, what's her name, Sylvia Van Allock speak other times. She's good, she's got her thoughts on it, and it's, how do you
How do you do it?
do it for all ages, so.
All right,
And there is a spring planning and zoning conference, I was going to try to talk to you and David about going, it's now full. It filled up incredibly fast, I've never seen it fill.
no, I haven't.
So who ran that?
That is the Office of Energy and Planning, it is
OEP.
basically the state's training for planning and zoning board members.
That's amazing.
Is it once a year, twice a year?
It used to be twice a year, it's now once a year, and, like I said, I've never
Maybe that's
seen
why
it.
it's filled up so much.
Yeah, well, I've never.
I remember I had my choice of,
Yeah, I've always had
Is that what
choice
we
of
went to?
everything,
we went to one associated with that,
Yeah, well, we don't.
yeah.
and then it, like I said, I was going to talk to you and David, I thought David was gonna be here today.
No, he didn't he write you?
He did, again, my
Yeah,
mind.
he's apparently coming next time.
Okay,
We'll see.
I still gotta get him to
all
sign
right.
his oath of office.
And so, excellent work, everybody, and,
Thank you.
truly, this has been the best evening of tonight that I can remember. So, yes, so you're gonna be here tomorrow as well?
Yes.
And I am. What times are you gonna be here?
I don't have much to do, so.
Where is that?
So I'm gonna.
We were
I'm
talking
gonna-
about 9 to noon? Is that what you said?
Yeah, I'm gonna come at around 10.
Okay.
I'm gonna come at 9.
All right, I'll be here at 9 and we'll just,
I mean, I don't know that we're gonna finish.
you know what? It's not a disaster.
No.
I mean, it'll get done.
It'll get done eventually,
I don't know
but
where
we'll
that is
make
from.
great progress, at
We'll
least.
make further progress. If anybody is just aching to fat finger data into an online form.
You're looking at that?
Yeah, right, I
You'll
mean,
forget.
I'm just giving them a chance.
I'm actually
You're not
very,
aching.
very poor at it.
Okay.
I have, well, you did
And
it
not,
worse than I
and
did.
not even happy to do it.
Okay.
If you want, I can have you come in and train you on how to figure out zoning permits and whether they should be issued or
I'm
not.
quite spoiled, you know, I went through the engineering phase, I don't know where it is. But anyways, and I was able to work my way up far enough in the corporation where I had a whole group of,
Yeah, well, your luck has run out.
I know. And so,
Yeah, you're really learning stuff.
so the.
You're already starting at the lowest salary
The
in the town.
the interesting thing is I started out before there were computers, and so, like, to learn how to type,
Oh, yeah, I never, when I was a kid, boys never
and,
learned how to
and,
type.
and then even with like Excel and PowerPoint, I mean, I know what can be done. Cause I had a lot of young pups coming in here whiz banging, I mean,
Yeah.
but for me, myself, I mean, I'm like at the most
You know,
basic.
I just wanna say, Rich, he said whiz bang, you might wanna turn that off now.
What, whiz bang kids?
No, whiz
The
bang,
words
whiz bang
get
is
pretty
a
salty language here.
salty language.
I don't get it.
Back in the day, whiz bang was a little risque.
Really?
I mean, isn't that in Oklahoma?
I believe.
When,
I don't
You
get
could
it.
be arrested.
Anyhow, so